Welcome to episode 195 of the Necronomicon.com. If you're thinking of starting your own podcast, you should check out the show notes from this episode. You can get up to 2 months of free hosting from Libsyn. You'll have access to critical stats, helping you launch your podcast, grow your audience, and bring your podcast to life. Go check out the show notes for the Libsyn promo code and start podcasting today.
You know that feeling when you're searching for a new horror book, but you're just being stared down by a wall of Stephen King? We're trying to change that. We're Butcher Cabin Books, a new horror-focused bookstore giving shelf space to indie horror writers. Don't worry, we still carry King, but he's quarantined to his own section. Learn more at horrorbookstore.com, where you can buy books online along with merch and mystery boxes. Or you can visit us in person in Louisville, Kentucky, where we're open year-round.
I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now. And get used to me, because we're going to be together forever. Forever.
And I'm Don Guillory. I'm not on mute. So I will just say, you know what? I have a feeling that if a younger brother to, like, let's just say these were some black kids, he's not opening the fucking window for his creepy brother. It's like the old Eddie Murphy skit where, or his old bit where it's like, oh yeah, this is the reason why a black family would survive. It's kind of, you see some shit happening, like, yeah, I'm leaving, I'm done, goodbye. Stupid kid. You open the window not once but twice.
All right, so joining us today, Sadie Hartmann is here. Sadie, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
I love that when you come here, you only do vampire movies. That's just your thing now. Like, anytime you come back, it's got to be a vampire movie. No, you were here for Lost Boys, another fantastic movie.
Yes, and I even thought that one of the characters reminded me so much of a character from the Lost Boys.
Ooh.
When
I want to know.
Do you know the grave worker guy, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay, when he actually turned into a vampire and he was sitting in that dark room with a rocking chair and he gets up and starts talking to that other guy, he looked so much like the lead vampire Max from Lost Boys to me. Yeah, like everything.
I can totally see that.
Yeah, it was weird. I took like a side-by-side photo and put it up on Twitter and was like, this has to be the inspiration for Max because they're dead on.
You're a much better person than me, because every time I see him, I think of Double Impact with Jean-Claude Van Damme and Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah.
He's your brother.
All right, so Sadie, you want to tell our listeners a bit about yourself and Nightworms and your awesome upcoming book I'm really looking forward to?
Sure, yeah. So I am Sadie Hartmann, Mother Horror on social media. I am the co-owner of the subscription company that specializes in curated horror, Nightworms. I also have a book coming out in August 8th. It's called 101 Horror Books to Read Before You're Murdered.
Nice.
Yeah. So what you want to do is use that book as a manual to get through all of the horror that you have to be reading before, Danny Glick is knocking at your window.
Now, if I finish the book, am I guaranteed to get murdered? Because that would really help me out some days. No, I'm kidding.
Oh,
no. But yeah, Nightworms obviously has been a big part of even this podcast. Like, you guys, you put me in one of your subscription packages, God, I think 5 years ago already. Oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, right. And then that pushed us here, or maybe it was 4 years ago. I bet it was 2019, but still, that's still a long time. And,
we did do our first pre-orders, I believe was October of 2018. Yeah, so it has been almost 5 years. Yeah. Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But super cool. But yeah, I literally used part of that sale to help us begin this, and here we are. So
I love that.
thank you.
I love that.
And now we have over 1 million downloads. Woohoo!
What?
Anyway,
Really?
yeah, we really do.
Well,
Yeah, so it's been
congratulations.
amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's get into this. Normally, I would say, why did you pick this film? But in this situation, I want to tweak the question a little bit. Tell me about your history with Salem's Lot.
So Salem's Lot, the novel by Stephen King, is the first Stephen King book I ever read. I think I was around 12 or 13. My mom is an avid constant reader, so she has an extensive Stephen King library. And I was sort of starting to read adult horror, but it was more like, I want to say a horror light. I was reading Agatha Christie, which isn't really horror, but it is murder mystery. And she did get into some of the details of, a murder or a person who was stalking people or something. It's starting to get dark is what I'm saying when I was, a preteen. And I would kind of browse my mom's bookshelves and look at the Stephen King covers. And Salem's Lot was the most, I want to say, like, tame book cover, that the one that didn't scare me too much. It just says Salem's Lot, the cover that she had, with like a little town in the center of the O of Lot. If you've seen that cover, I'm pretty sure it's the first edition. Yeah. So I thought, how could this book about like a small town be that scary? So I took the dust jacket off and left it on my mom's bookshelf and brought it up to my room. And I think I read it with my fingers gripping the sides of the book in a day or two. And it felt so grown up and adult to me at the time. Reading it, at least several times afterwards, I kind of get new things out of it every time I read it. It's like when you read it when you're a kid, there's things that you focus on more than when you're an adult. Like the Glick kids and Mark Petrie were obviously so much more interesting to me than this like relationship between Ben and Susan. Like, I didn't really give a shit about that, but it was like very steamy and kind of like scandalous, their instant romance. But yeah, so I read it then as a 12, 13, and then have read it. I try to read it in the fall. I wouldn't say every year, but every couple of years I do read it again.
Nice. No, it's such a good story. And I was amazed at how much has stuck with me. I only read the book once, and I think I was in 8th grade. So that part, I don't remember as clearly, but the 1979 miniseries I've seen several times throughout my life. And it's just always, there's just certain scenes that really stick with me. Obviously the Glick kids, but also the image of Barlow and like, just these different random things. And then this time, being the terrible human being I am, I just solely concentrated on how no one can stop for a stop sign, how this guy always leaves his Jeep door open. And I was like, what has happened to me that this is what I care about? I'm just an angry old man yelling, get off my lawn. That's all this is.
Oh my God.
It's like old TV shows. I mean, that's probably what you're noticing. It's like old TV shows where no one ever locks the front door. They come home and they close the door and then they go about their business.
Yes. And
Absolutely.
I didn't watch any of these TV movie series when I was younger because I was too afraid. So this came out in 79. I was born in 76. I did not watch this when I was younger. I think the first time I watched it maybe was later in high school or even later than that. And then it's been about a decade or so. I was telling James, it's been about a decade or so since I've watched it. So this was a real treat for me.
It's awesome. What about you, Don? Have you read the book number 1? And how many times have you seen this?
No, you got to remember, like, I was a sci-fi nerd when I was a kid. So I was reading that type of stuff when I was growing up. And then my overly religious mother, because I would watch the horror and read sci-fi and all that and history stuff. But yeah, my overly religious mother, if I come home with like a horror book, I was immediately going to be taken to church. She was convinced I was going to be an engineer. So like all the science stuff was fine for me to have around. But by God, if I happen to have something like, I don't know, the Stand or Tommy Knockers or anything by Poe in the house, because I read it at school, like it was a wrap. So I never got that opportunity. But when it came to watching stuff, because to this day, I mean, my mom's not that way anymore. But my mom, I think because of me, ended up watching a lot of horror. And so she's gotten so accustomed to it. She doesn't look at horror films. I mean, those that specifically are in the horror category, she doesn't look at them as horror movies. She's always looking at them as something else. Like it's basically, none of this makes sense. Why would somebody go into that house if you know it's evil? She just kind of looks at it as, if it's the real world, real situation, how am I gonna deal with this? But no, this is one of those things I saw. I can't remember if it was like on a replay. I obviously didn't see it in 79. Me being born in 78. Same thing with like Trilogy of Terror. These are all things that I saw later from renting, or it happened to be on TV. Like my grandparents' house, me and my cousins would stay up and watch these scary movies and a bunch of other, movies that they probably wouldn't let us watch during the day, but because everybody else is asleep, we're sitting there watching, Tales from the Crypt and Tales from the Dark Side, from the Dark Side and Twilight Zone reruns and even the new iterations of it. But I mean, it unlike you, James, that's not the stuff that stood out to me. For me, it wasn't like that minutia stuff. It was stuff like, okay, you've got not Ben, but Fred Willard's character, Larry, because the Bonnie keep calling him Honey all the time. I forget his real name. But that's the type of stuff that stood out to me. Was you have such a small town, a small community. Everybody knows that you're having sex with this guy's wife. Everybody knows, but you guys act like it's a secret. I'm like, everybody knows. And that's so real. Everyone would typically suspect of something happening, suspect something is happening. And the people that are doing it, like, I don't think anybody knows. Do you think anybody knows? Do you think anybody? Meanwhile, everybody, I'm sure the Glick kids knew. Like all of them knew. Like, well,
they should have come to knock on their window. Ha ha.
Yeah. That would have been an interesting scene as opposed to the shotgun. It's like, what's the little Glick boy doing outside? I do feel like they could have done something more with this movie if they had included the fourth brother, Jiminy. But
oh my God. The Martin Short
you're
character.
Fired.
Oh, I love it.
He's the one that got away.
You know what, Don? Just like you said, horror would never exist if it was centered around me. Like, when Susan goes back to the Marston house, at the end of the movie, that is just like not a reality in Sadie's life. Like none of this would happen. I wouldn't be opening windows for any floating children. I wouldn't be walking through the woods to get home to my friend's house. Like horror just wouldn't exist if I was the main character.
Well, I mean, obviously, we've done this before, so we're going to skip around a little bit. But no, that part you bring up about going through the woods, I thought as an adult, looking at it through adult eyes, when the Glick brothers like, we're going to take a shortcut. my first thing is like, you stupid freaking kids.
Yeah.
But then I realized like, oh shit, I did the same stuff when I was their age.
Yep.
And as you get older, you stop doing that stuff because, your sense of adventure is gone. Your sense of I'm a kid and I'm beating the system as far as, there's definitely a point A to point B way to get to the house. That's the accepted way. We're going to go the way we're not supposed to go. And it's really cool that at least in the story and the way it's presented, that by breaking that rule, they get punished. By going through, taking this shortcut through the woods, a dark place they're not supposed to be going. There's a big history of it within literature and within films of going through the dark woods. Something bad's going to happen to you. So watching it as a kid, I'm immediately waiting. Oh, something bad is going to happen, but I'm not thinking about their mindset. As an adult, I'm thinking the same thing of, you shouldn't be going through the woods. This is a bad moment. But then as a kid, I would have gone through the woods because I wouldn't know I'm in a horror movie.
Right.
Whereas I'm watching as a kid, like, oh, something bad's going to happen. But when I'm doing it at that same age, I'm not thinking, some vampire or some demon is going to come and get me. My thing would be, oh shit, the street lights are on. I better get home really quickly. Let me cut through, this wooded area, cut through somebody's yard to get to my house. Something I'm not normally going to do, but I'm going to do it. Here, the Glick kids get punished for doing it.
Absolutely.
I thought it was interesting too that the movie sort of skips the lore of vampires and Straker, who is kind of the bodyguard and the kind of servant to Barlow. He captures the little Glick boy, Ralphie, and brings him back to the Marston house all wrapped up in plastic, which he was really handling that like a little side of beef, wasn't he? Like,
oh yeah.
The little kid didn't weigh hardly anything. So then he lays him out on the table. And I thought it was interesting that all the vampire when Barlow has his way with them, they turn into vampires. They're not dead, which in vampire lore, it's sort of like, don't you have to feed the people your own blood to turn them into vampires? Like, isn't that traditional vampire lore?
Yeah, I feel like it changes, but yeah, like that's like the main lore. Yeah.
Usually they're dead, right? Like they're your food.
Yeah.
Like you would kill them. So I don't really
bite into their neck, you suck their life out. Yeah.
Yeah, they're dead, right? That it's almost like a cross between vampire and zombies where they're like turning them into almost like zombies.
Sexy zombies. It's always sexy zombies.
Sexy zombies.
I do love the glowing eyes though. I thought that was I want that in everything. I just watched Renfield as well. It's actually the episode right before this one. And so I've been thinking a lot about familiars and about the glowing eyes. And I thought that was interesting that both movies had that in common as well. But I was really thinking about Renfield and Dracula versus these two. And I thought it was neat seeing that juxtaposition because Renfield's all about trying to get out of it. And here he's very much very, very into his role and helping Kurt Barlow out and making sure this all goes well. And he just seems like such a happy guy when he delivers this kid, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He's just like, look at this great meal.
What do you think he gets out of it?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's not really clear. It's sort of like he just enjoys being a villain.
Some people do.
He kind of reminded me also, like James, we were talking earlier about Needful Things and how that's one of your favorite Stephen King books. Yeah. It reminded me when he's setting up the antique store for the first time and like some of the townspeople are kind of bebopping around in there and visiting him. That kind of had a Needful Things element to it. And then he's also kind of like, he has this large collection of like antique canes and he's putting them away inside this like antique store all together. And I was like, this is so Storm of the Century too, as well. Like I was looking for the Storm of the Century cane that the bad demon guy, like, I was like, that would be so cool if they like cross over like that. But
that would have been amazing if it was in there.
Yeah.
Well, you typically have that with Stephen King based movies, right? As far as like there's some
and books,
little Easter egg or some reference to another book or film.
Yeah. The universe.
Yeah, because the books are all tied together in the universe and that kind of thing. But even just like the little nods that you see in things are so nice all the time. Like even if it's not like plot wise tied in, just like little things in the background sometimes can be so cool.
Yeah.
So that would be amazing if the cane had been there.
Yeah, I was looking for it, but I didn't see it.
I know they were supposed to be making a new Salem's Lot, and I feel like it just kept getting pushed off, and I don't know if it's ever coming or not. I suppose I could have easily looked that up before I came here today, but maybe it'll be in there. That'd be great.
That would be great. I highly recommend that. I love that crossover stuff too. It's really fun. One thing I did notice too, my favorite aspect of Salem's Lot, the novel, is how invested you get in the lives of the townspeople and how kind of King peels back the layer of this small town to show you all the like yucky stuff that's going on between different people and neighbors and the connections that everybody has. And I felt like the miniseries did do that a little bit, but mostly just with the men. Like I feel like all the men were really creepy. Like the one plumber guy who's like leering at Susan as she's walking around. Yeah. But I also thought that Ben was a little creepy too. I mean, I was like live tweeting as I was watching it, but like she's just sitting there minding her own business at the lake, clearly by herself, doing some sketching or whatever. And he's creeping around a tree, spying on her, and they have like an instant romance. Did you guys think that that was like an instant romance?
Yeah, I thought it was
No.
very strange. Like, really? Because I did too. What do you go ahead?
Oh no, I was gonna say I just saw Predator. That's all it. No, I don't mean that Predator, James. I mean with the whole looking around a tree. No, I just you pointed out it when because I almost jumped in and said a little creepy.
Yeah.
I just found him off-putting.
Yeah.
And I often some of my friends they'll point out about the things that men do around them that make them uncomfortable. And so I look for stuff like that, in especially films like this, right? Because you have this moment where, Cullen or whatever his name, the guy who Larry hires, the guy who Larry is married to Larry's love interest, or he's having the affair with,
right?
How when he finds out about it, it's I'm holding up the shotgun to both of you. I'm going to do this, and then. Now that I scared the guy, I'm going to go in here and beat my wife.
Ugh, yeah, that was unnerving.
So I look at this stuff, whereas if this had been me watching the 80s or the 90s, as far as those ages, I wouldn't have looked at that as being out of place, right? Because the way it's presented in the media in the 70s and 80s is like, oh, yeah, you can do stuff like this. You can have, guys being creepy. You can have guys hitting women because there's some reason as to why they're doing it. If they're just doing it, then that's bad. But if they have a reason like infidelity, of course he should be able to hit his wife. But with Ben, I just found it creepy because she has this space that she's designated for herself. She hasn't sent any signals like, hey, come talk to me, waving him over, seeing him and winking or smiling and or saying something like, hey, creeper, what are you doing by the tree? Why don't you come over and talk to me?
Yeah.
Because there's not that moment. So I imagine all these guys who see them like, yeah, this is how you pick up a chick. This is how you do it, man. You let her know you're interested. I know she's over there working out, doing deadlifts, and she has headphones on and a t-shirt that says, do not talk to me. But that just means I need to go talk to her.
Yeah.
So I just see I'm like, so many red flags. I didn't like Ben through the entirety of the movie.
Well, and it's so sad because Ben in the book is actually a cool guy. And I love the whole little group of crusaders that we end up with towards the middle of the book. You have Ben and Susan and Mark. And there's a few like side characters with that. But in the show, I was just kind of like, yeah, he doesn't know his boundaries. Like that he came up and asked her some questions and everything, and she kind of dodged a bit of that. And she was asking him about being married. Oh, it says on the back of the book you're married with kids. Is that still a thing? And he's like, you didn't answer my question. Like he was really aggressive with her. Yeah, off-putting for sure.
This guy's going to drop a new edition just to get rid of that.
Well, no, not even beyond that, Sadie, with that whole conversation that he's having with her, right? It's, oh, do you like the book? Oh, I just started. I read it because of the other book. Well, what was the name of the book? So it's not only that, it's the idea of, oh, you're reading my book. Let me talk to you and impress you a little bit.
Right.
To try and get in your pants. And I know there are people in the literary world who do stuff like that. And this presenting it on screen demonstrates how extra creepy it is, because some of those people do not pick up the signals that they are being they're being inappropriate.
Some of them just ignore it as well.
Yes.
Well, that too.
Yes.
And if you guys don't know about all that stuff, just join Twitter and you'll know within 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So,
Oh God. It's a whole can of worms.
I wish I was joking. I really do.
I know.
I thought this was writing that could have easily fixed this. Like if he had just been out there and then she looked up and then looked at her book and then she initiated with, "Is this you?" Like, look how easy that is to fix. And he's no longer a creep.
Yeah.
And she shows she's interested, instantly fixes it. I get that it was 1979 and things were different, but today that's how I would write it. If you were going to stick with all this.
Well, James, I would argue no. I mean, not as far as like the way you say, as far as like 79, this is because we were on the cusp. I'm sorry to bore everybody with history right now. But we had the women's rights movement, the push for the Equal Rights Amendment. You had birth control. You had the conservative right, or the moral majority pushing against birth control. And get this, daycare. They were against these things because it was about women being outside of the house. So you're seeing some movies at that time that are approaching this idea of women's independence and demonstrating that they actually have identities that are not shaped by the men around them. So I think it was just a creative issue as opposed to, it's 1979 because those changes were already happening to show that, I don't know, women had their own identities, personalities, and worth as opposed to, like, I don't know, she was going to be a complete fan about it and because this guy's on the cover.
Right.
And, I'm sorry, on the cover, Jesus. He's got his headshot in the back of the book in the About Author section. And he's going to creep on her even though he has a wife and kids. Or at least... I see him as more of a monster than the actual vampire in the movie. That's what I'm trying to say.
And so you were saying in the book he's actually cool and not like that?
Oh yeah. He wasn't predatory in the book, at least the way that I remember it. And I've read it several times and I've never felt that he was being predatory with Susan. In fact, I think they have a very wholesome relationship right at the beginning because they go on like a cute date to like an ice cream parlor, I want to say. He's living at this boarding house, which I think he pretty much has to check in and out when he's going there. Like there was a lot more to do with the boarding house in the book, where he kind of has developed this relationship with the person who's running it. And in the miniseries, I loved the weird dynamic between the woman who's running the boarding house and that weasel guy.
Weasel,
like,
yeah.
Where did they find this guy? Like his over animated face was cracking me up. Like anytime he was on, it was kind of my favorite, to be honest. Like he's the unsung hero. Yeah.
It's weird because even the constable or the cop is kind of like confronts him at one point. I can't remember where it was in the movie, but he confronts him for sitting down. I was like, "What are you doing? Creeping on people, spying on people?" And I'm like, I feel like he's the most normal person here because he's just like, it's like, "Oh, there's some weird shit going on. Let me look over there," because that's what any of us would do. I'm not going to walk over there. I'm going to look from a distance. But meanwhile, everybody else is doing their, I don't know. It's God. What was? I guess you could compare it to the Munsters, where everybody else is doing weird shit or immoral stuff, and here it is. Weasel is just kind of, he's just a normal dude.
Yeah,
like I'm gonna watch you guys.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I thought it was funny too with this whole grave digging situation or these caretakers, and a stranger who's new to the town is hiring them for a job, and their job is to pick up this man-sized crate and put it in the back of this delivery truck, and the crate is freezing cold and it keeps creeping on them in the back, but their first idea when they stop is to open it.
Yeah.
Again, not my first choice.
I feel like Sadie is the final girl and the rest of us are all going to die along the way doing really stupid shit.
We don't open strange crates that creep on you. No.
Yeah, as much as I would love to say that kind of stuff is unrealistic to me, I've worked with people where I'm like, that guy would definitely open the crate.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So,
The first to die.
Well, you look at to compare this to a movie that I'm not going to have as part of the movie recommendations, but Return of the Living Dead, right? All the trouble starts because, hey, let's crack this thing. Or actually, doesn't crack it open, but he starts screwing around. It's like, this is made by the government. This thing is built to last, and hits it. When common sense would tell you, like, don't hit some weird box capsule, anything like that. And definitely don't open what we find out to be a vampire box, but don't open the
vampire box.
The box that is cold to the touch, but then as you're driving, it keeps getting colder in the vehicle that you're in. That's separated from you and where the trunk is, or the crate is.
It's true.
the whole thing's so weird. It's hilarious to me, but it's also so strangely realistic as I watch the news every day and just watch people just keep opening dangerous things. So I don't know.
Right. It's like, we found a mummy, all these mummies
Right.
buried. We should dig them up. And you're watching the news like, no, you should leave the mummies in the ground. I'm sure they're cursed or some apocalypse is going to happen. Like, just leave the mummies in the ground.
Look, my favorite one was that there's this one sarcophagus and there was this black goo found at the bottom of it.
Yes.
I'm like, don't test it. Don't do anything with the goo. Leave it where it is.
Don't touch the goo. We need to talk too about the fact that Mark Petrie lives with these parents who are continuously judging him for his horror obsession.
Yes.
I thought that was so, this is also a part of the book. I remember specifically after the Glick brothers, the drama that happened with them, and the parents are like, we should go check on Mark. This has to be really traumatizing for him. His dad has a conversation with him about are you concerned about, what one of your friends has died? Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to process it? And Mark says this really profound thing to his dad. And I can't remember what it is word for word, but he says something about no, it's fine. The monsters are, the monsters aren't gonna shit. Now I can't remember exactly what he said, but the fact that he is fascinated with the monsters and has grown up reading comic books and stuff makes it that much more realistic to him. There are monsters out there, but the ones that are coming for me aren't the fictional monsters, if that makes sense.
Right.
He was kind of alluding to the fact that no, it's the people of this town, or it's, the predators that are hiding out in their kidnapping vans, it's those kinds of monsters is what he's referring to. So I almost feel like Mark is so brave in this book and in this miniseries because of the fact that he was trained on monsters. So my pitch is that if parents are listening to this and your kid is obsessed with monsters or comic books or whatever, let them have their monsters. It trains them to deal with real life situations.
We always bring that up with Scooby-Doo, because Scooby-Doo taught us all that the real monsters are always human. And that has stuck with me so much ever since the first time I heard it. But watching Mark interact with his parents viscerally hurt me, because my parents were cool. They didn't care about that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
for the
mine
most part,
too.
right? They let me do whatever. And I spent a lot of time at my aunt and uncle's house, and that's where we watched every fucking horror movie that we could, right? So I didn't have this, but there was still that piece of me that was oh my God, why are you not getting this thing that's so important at that age of you love something and you want to be involved with it all the time, it literally viscerally hurt me to watch his dad be such a dick about it.
Yeah, he was when are you going to grow up type of stuff. Yeah.
I loved that. I guess soon.
Thank you. Because you see how you could see, not to with that episode of The Simpsons with Ralph Wiggum, where it's oh, we can freeze right here and you can see where his heart breaks. Like
Oh,
I paused
Yep.
it on this movie because the actor who's portraying Mark does such a good job of, well, I guess someday. That whole thing of I'm giving up. I'm interested in this stuff. Obviously, I'm interested in acting. I'm interested in doing something that's going to get me out of this place. And here you are telling me that I'm wrong for that. So, this is you're basically telling somebody, and like you were saying, Sadie, as far as like the parents that need to listen to these messages, you were basically killing off a part of your child's identity when you overly critique the stuff that they're into. Now, I mean, as far as like stuff that's not harming anybody, this is a valid interest. It's not, the kid's not dealing drugs. He's not consuming drugs. He's not, doing anything harmful to himself or somebody else. He's just interested in horror.
yeah, and it's not a waste of time.
No.
He actually becomes the hero in this whole situation. Like, he's the one who's brave enough to go deal with this whole thing himself. Like, and I love the full circle part where the dad, oh, can you get out of these handcuffs? Like, are these toy handcuffs or whatever? And Mark puts them on and gets out and is real proud of himself. And then he goes, hey, I can get out of a rope too if you tie this rope behind my back. And the dad's like, I'm not gonna, no, maybe some other time, and leaves. And Mark is really crushed. But then later, when he is actually tied up by a human monster, he gets out. And I loved that full circle moment where I was like, see, like, the stuff that he's picking up on and learning and like fascinated with is the stuff that's going to help him later in life.
And it was so nicely done too. Like it didn't feel forced. It felt like we know this about him and it makes perfect sense. And I loved the execution of this. But yeah, man, like Don, you said you're killing a piece of your child. And I think that's how it should be explained to everybody. I don't care if it's horror. I don't care if it's My Little Pony, whatever the hell they love. Let them love it. The world fucking sucks, man. Like, let people have the little things they love. And I was going to say, anyone who follows me on Twitter knows this week I got super pissed when somebody insulted my tarantula, right? And I was just like, fuck you. So I insulted their dog with the exact same insult. and they unfriended me. And I was like, so it's okay to insult my pet, but not yours, whatever. But I'm a 45-year-old man, and that's not going to destroy my life. But it still affected me and pissed me off because it's this thing I love. And so when you say it's destroying a part of a child, man, like I don't think that you could sum it up any better than that, because at that age, these things are so the focus of our happy moments.
Oh, yeah.
Know? And man,
I mean,
put it that way. I want to hit everybody with that. Go ahead.
This is nothing against my folks at all. Because they may listen to this and I don't want them to think that this is a dig at them. But there were moments that I had with my parents that I can look back on and say, like, that's when I stopped liking X, or this is when I stopped liking Y, because they would say things like, oh, well, you're not going to get paid for this, or this isn't a good career path, or this. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, holy shit. There are people that are out here making millions of dollars being video game streamers or being video game like professional, whatever, right? So I've had this talk with my kid pretty often, which is, if you're interested in something, don't hide it from me. Don't feel ashamed. Don't let anybody, I don't care who it is, whether it's me, your mom, your grandparents, anybody, don't let anybody take the joy you have away from what you love. And when she grabs her phone to show me what other people would regard as pointless or ridiculous video, whatever, I'm like, she shows me the video, I watch it, I may laugh, I may not, but I'm not going to say, like, I don't want to see that stupid shit, I don't want to see this, why would I want to see that? This is ridiculous. And any critique would be a valid one, which would, she showed me one earlier today, and it was, it had some content that I didn't like. And I told her, like, I don't think this is appropriate for you to watch at this age. So she can still leave that door open later on to watch something like that, as opposed to she's never going to show me anything again, or she's never going to be interested in showing something, because when I showed Dad this, he was always like, oh, this sucks, this is stupid. But there are people out there that parent that way, and I don't get it. I don't understand why you would want to Yeah, like the parents here, I don't understand why you would want to lessen something about your kid or lessen something about who they are and then make them feel like shit. Because that's what I saw in Mark's face in that scene.
Absolutely.
Which, I mean, it again, like I said, I had to pause it at that moment because that hit me. I mean, not in a hard sense as far as like, oh, you know, I need to take a day to really, you know, do some stuff and have some therapy. But I looked at it as like, I was like, damn, this was a hard hitting moment. And yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you said that, Dawn, because I mean we are getting a little bit off into the weeds, but I think it's really important because it's making me think about the fact that with this Mark character, and just what we've been talking about with Scooby-Doo and real monsters and
Right.
all of those things. Like, I personally used to retreat into my room when I would have like a hard time at school and deal with all the pressures that kids have to deal with at school. And I would come home and live in my books, and my mom would allow it. You know, I would just come down for dinner and then go back up and get back into my book. And you look at my life today, I had like a long period of time where I got left high school. I met my husband. We got married. We had kids. I still would read and stuff. I didn't have the time for it that much, but raised kids, raised a family, did the whole thing. I didn't go to college. And now I am back with the books and I'm reviewing horror, and I have a business that I started with my best friend, you know, sending horror out into the world, talking about horror, writing a book about horror.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in the workforce. I've made my own way, and it all tied back to this thing that my mom nurtured in me, which was this passion for horror and reading. So you never know, you know, how these, like, sure, you know, my parents could have been concerned that I wasn't on the track to go to college, but I'm doing something that makes me happy and makes me money. So, I mean, it's a win-win for
Absolutely.
me.
Well, and I don't want to just stay on this, but you know, I always come back to like my parents were like, you can't just make money playing video games all day.
You're like,
And
well,
yes, you can today because they couldn't predict the future. So I just want to throw out, they don't know everything. I'm a parent. We definitely don't know everything. Sorry to burst
absolutely.
anyone's bubble.
Absolutely.
But yeah, let's roll back into the film overall. Sadie, what else do you got?
Well, speaking of parents that don't know anything, the Glick
Oh my
parents
God.
went ahead and let their kids walk home in the dark through the forest, and then all this terrible stuff happened. I thought it was completely hilarious that when they're doing this search and Ben decides that he's going to join in on the search, he finds like a scrap of fabric that was from
Right.
Straker, I think. And the cop goes, "Don't touch that." And then he comes over and fucking touches it and puts it back into the bag. And I was like, this is class A police work here. Like, we're going to catch this person. And then this is the same guy that ends up at the very end of the movie getting in his station wagon and peeling out and leaving the town to die by vampires, right? I love that.
Yeah, I love that so much because, like, on the one hand, it's the chicken shit thing when you were the big tough cop this whole time, but on the other, it's so real. You're saving your family. Like, this could go either way. I like that he hands him a gun, which, you know, kind of leads us into the next part. But I thought that it was great that he wasn't just a chicken shit. He's trying to get his family out of there too.
Yeah, he was like, no, thank you. I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I was kind of confused at first because when the Ralphie character is dead and floating outside of the window is the iconic scene from this movie.
Mhm.
But in the book, it's actually, I believe, it's the other older brother who visits Mark at the window. And that's the scene that is in the book that's so terrifying. We don't really see Ralphie turn Danny, I don't believe. I think so.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, I actually don't think so. That's the order in which it happened. So the iconic scene is they changed it up just a little bit. But when Danny comes and visits Mark, I thought that was a really key scene too. But they didn't play into the weird smile, which is the part in the book that is so terrifying for me and so memorable. It's one of the scariest moments in horror, I think, classically. Danny does come to Mark's window, and Mark reflects on seeing him trying to smile, and it turns into this like freakish grimace. And he doesn't open the window, obviously, but he did for his little brother, and that's why he was turned. But yeah, that I think that's my favorite scene in the entire movie, apart from Barlow coming into the kitchen with the Glick parents. I think it was, or Mark's parents, and crashing their heads together.
Yes.
That's my other favorite scene.
This is a great scene. But yeah, the iconic moment that you were talking about, like I had years where I didn't even know what that was from. I just like remembered seeing it somewhere and knowing that it terrified me. And then at some point I rewatched the movie and I was like, oh shit, that's what it's from, you know? And then this time I hadn't watched it in almost 20 years. So we're talking about forever ago. But like that's how much that scene affected me. And I kind of wonder if that rolls into having read it. Because like I said, I read it in like 8th grade, so I don't remember it well. But I kind of wonder if that like tapped into something from having read it, and that whole scene just terrified the shit out of me.
So you're talking about funny scenes, and I was thinking about I guess that part where they go into the basement and there are no stairs.
Wait, which the basement of Marston House?
Yeah, the idea they're going looking for Barlow. And it's like, oh, there are no you know, the whole idea, because that's again when you get into this thing of realizing you're viewing it based off of the genre that it is. It's that same thing of like, if you're going to go in a room, turn the lights on. If you hear a knock, don't say, hello. And if you're going into a basement, obviously as a character, you're not going to think, oh, I need to make sure stairs are here. But as a viewer, you're like, holy shit, there's a new thing you better check for. But there are also movies where it's, check to make sure the stairs are stable, but the idea that it's non-existent.
It's interesting that Barlow's not really in the movie so much too, don't you think?
No. Oh yeah, I think it's interesting, but I mean the whole idea of, I guess the mystery behind it, but behind not having him there, not having him visible, adds to the idea of like who's actually doing this, what is actually involved. Because even when I can't remember who went to go talk to Straker about it, but it might have been the cop who asked. Actually, it was the cop, because he asked about the clothes. He said, "Oh, you normally wear a black suit." Oh, I have two. So he brings him to him and he says, "Oh, your boss's name is Barlow. What's his first name?" And there's this kind of interaction where Straker's a little bit suspicious of why he wants to know, but then also there's that mystery of like, well, who the hell could Barlow be? It's his business partner or whatever. Because even at that moment, you're not suspecting what's taking place. If you're viewing it through the eyes of everybody else that's there, you don't know where this is going, what direction it's taking.
Right. Yeah. I also was wondering too if this is like a racket that they've done everywhere. I couldn't remember that from the book either. If this is something that Straker goes and sets up like an antique store and then brings in, his quote unquote business partner in a crate. Mm-hmm. It just feels like this is something they've done town after town after town, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if it's mentioned at all, but it certainly feels like this is their usual pattern.
Yeah, like they've been doing it. I think when there's like two cops talking in the station, and they had done some investigating, and he said something about like, yeah, that Barlow was born in another country in like the 1920s, and then they somehow like met up at some point, and it did seem like this is something they move from town to town, turning everybody into vampires, I suppose.
Plus, it would be looking at timeline, right? it would be a whole lot easier to deal with something like this. So if you're going to small towns, I almost said dairy. You go to Salem's Lot. If you go to a small town like Salem's Lot, because even at the beginning, Ava asks Ben, like, "Oh, why'd you come here? Why would you come here to visit?" Making it clear, like, this is not a place that people come to settle. This is a place that people are from, and they either stay or they leave. But people tend to not move here. People don't come here for a vacation to visit. So why are you here? So I look at what Straker and Barlow are doing is you're taking advantage of the fact that these are small towns. Is there going to be a newspaper that's really going to be covering, all these disappearances or all the, these events that are taking place with residents, right? And if so, you move to another small town in a different country or different state. No one's going to be going like, "Oh, I heard you had just come from Salem's Lot. There were a bunch of people that went missing there, and then now people start missing or start dying, and then it becomes an issue of, damn, there are a lot of people missing here, and everything started since you got here."
This is just like those 36 towns I just read about.
Yeah. So, it wouldn't be something that you could do. I should say, if you updated this today with the internet and social media, I'm sure it'd be a whole different twist you could have on it. But I love, like even at the beginning, Ben, I shouldn't say the beginning, when people are starting to figure out something is going on, there's that moment where it's like, well, none of this started happening until I got here, speaking as Ben, until I got here. So there's this idea like, oh, is there a connection between me and what's going? But I also looked at it as he's got this writer's brain going on, which is I write and maybe I'm thinking a little bit too much here. Kind of like we did an episode on Pontypool where the disc jockey, the shock jock, has this moment where he thinks like, "Oh man, all this is happening because of me." So again, it goes back to this idea of I feel like Ben is so damn creepy and self-centered and narcissistic to where he thinks that all this is starting to become. But anyway, with the small towns, that idea that you can now get away with all of this as Barlow and Stryker, right? Or Straker. You can get away with all this because there's not going to be breadcrumbs that somebody else can follow to go back and say like, "Oh, you were in all these towns and all this weird stuff had happened in these towns that we know of. It's got to be you." Police aren't going to be following you. FBI is not going to be following you. Nobody's going to be there because there's not enough of an impact to make people pay attention outside of wherever that area is. And not only that, they're not going to suspect Barlow and Straker. I mean, he's an antique dealer. What is he really, could this person really be doing this? And plus, you're not going to suspect that some old man with an antique store is hosting a vampire or moving a vampire around with him to take advantage of people, take advantage of the locals. Because that seems weird.
Yeah, if anything, they're going to be focusing in on Ben, who, apparently like used to live in this town, left, and then came back and seems really preoccupied with this house that is notoriously quote unquote haunted. And then these strange people move into it. But Ben is the one that's like being really shady about the whole thing. If you think about it, like he hooks up with his teacher or whatever for dinner, his former teacher, and he makes that really weird statement where he's just like, "Do you think that like some buildings are just evil, like they attract evil?" Yeah. And then the guy is like, "Oh yeah, maybe," and they're thinking about it and he goes, "Well, maybe I'm evil or something." Doesn't he like call himself out? He's like, "Why am I attracted to it? Because I'm evil, of course."
Yeah, there's so many reasons to blame him, and I thought there should be more of that. Like they have a little bit where they're like going through his stuff in his room or trying to read what he was writing or things like that. I would have loved to see way more of that. And I felt like a lot of places in this, you could tell they were like really stretching time because it was a mini series. So like they show him like driving for like 2 minutes at a time, or things like that. And I'm like, you could really use that time to like add paranoia of, is Ben the one causing whatever's happening? I thought that would have been way cooler, but.
Well, they had a good starting point where Weasel goes into his room. When you're talking about reading stuff, Weasel goes to his room and Ava catches him. And he's like, oh, it's just a piece of paper. You know, he feels like he's the one who's wrong, which he is wrong for snooping, but so he's the one who's wrong. But he's like,
Weasel can do no wrong, so you're the one who's wrong, buddy.
No. I'm saying that's the way. That's the guilt that he seems to present. I'm like, no, like I think you're going off of a hunch. You feel like something's amiss here. But yeah, there would have been a great moment because there was something on social media a couple of days ago where a kid, since we mentioned video games earlier, there was a kid who was playing, I don't know, Fortnite or Call of Duty or something. His phone butt dialed 911. And when he butt dialed 911, he had shouted out, I was like, oh, I just killed two, or I just killed two people, right? So he yells out, the police show up, and he's explaining like, no, I was playing a video game. So just looking at a scene like Weasel reading the papers that Ben has out, and it's something like it's something that deals with his plot or something of the book, and saying like, you know, I will have her fall in love, blah, blah, blah. Then I will kill her, blah, blah, blah. And I'll do that. So it looks, you know, he's just outlining or journaling a story, figuring out what he wants to do. Weasel sees it, takes it to the police. Like you were saying, James, like now it becomes an issue of like, this is our guy. This is the person that we should be suspicious about. I mean, I'm in full agreement. I would love for something like that have been thrown in to where you're now seeing how this small town is operating because you have somebody who's new and quote unquote strange, even though he's not new, he's returning.
The thing about Ben, at least in this miniseries, I don't know about any of the others. Like I said, it's been too long, but he really hits a lot of the vampire stereotypes. Like vampires are all about sexual deviance, religious deviance, societal deviance, right? And just like coming in from the outside, invading your culture, basically. And that's exactly what Ben's doing on some level. That's why they're so concerned. Oh, why are you hooking up with this nice lady? And why are you out at the lake with her? And this and that, you know, like he represents so many of these little pieces of vampire lore. And I think that that's a really cool thing, because I always love when the protagonist and antagonist really mirror each other. And obviously Barlow's not really hitting it on the sexual deviance side for me on this one. But I love my sexy zombie vampires. What can I say?
Look, you're not into the bluish gray vampires?
I could be. I'm just not into bald guys, Don. You know that.
Well, I guess I'll be sleeping in a room by myself at the next convention.
Wow. Anyway, this has gone way off track now. But no, I just thought it was really, really cool how Ben fits so many of these. And I don't know if it's like that in the book, but I loved that.
Yeah, I mean, so many weird things happen as soon as he arrives on the scene. So it's the townspeople would be trying to put two and two together. Like, you know, this guy's dog dies, which they kind of glossed over. But I mean, Mike's dog is dead. There's all these people who have this weird sleeping sickness where they're having these like vivid dreams and kind of stumbling around, acting strange. You have the Glick kids are missing. Like, I don't know why they didn't just throw Ben in jail, like just to keep an eye on him. Like the minute he shows up, there's just all kinds of that, you know, the infidelity thing going on. Like you have a crime of passion right there. In fact, I think that he does kill his wife in the book, but I could be wrong. But I think he does.
Which, I mean, if it was done that way in the book, that would have been an interesting thing, interesting way to take it in the I was going to say cinematic version, but the miniseries version, because everyone thought that Cully was out of town, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. Because wasn't he sitting on the steps with his beer, like kind of watching this whole thing unfold?
Oh yeah, he was eavesdropping, and that's a great scene where he's just listening, and he's like, I got all their I have all the receipts. It's just like if you were to go to your partner and you found all these texts that they had with somebody they were cheating with, and you ask them all those questions, which is, oh yeah, you know, who were you hanging out with yesterday? Who are you talking to? Blah, blah, blah. What did you go see at the movies? And then you bring up these texts where it's, you know, they're talking about all their dirty fantasy stuff that they have been doing, planning, whatever. but yeah, it would have been interesting to have her body there. She's been shot with a shotgun or possibly a handgun, and Ben would be the only viable subject. But I mean, I know in this town, everybody would be like, well, she was out with Larry.
Yeah, there is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things that go on in that town. There's I'm not sure if it's the Weasel character or not, but there is a character, a derelict character that lives in like a dump or something. And he's seeing some things too. They're kind of piecing together, like I said, like the whole town is full of like horrible stuff going on underneath the layer of, idyllic small town stuff. So there is like a lot of things going on that also tie into the vampire thing. So the people turning into vampires is actually much slower. Like the TV series makes it seem like everybody's just flipping, into vampirism like so quickly, but in the book it's happening much slower and much less noticeable.
It almost feels like the town improves with the vampires, but that's just me.
It
I see
gets
you've
more
lived
exciting.
in small town America.
Here's something that's well, I guess I shouldn't say it stood out to me, but something I thought about with the burning down of the house. Now, mind you, this is something that gets done over and over again. But that kind of connects to what you were saying. And I was looking for the quote because I wrote that part down where Ben talks about the evil house. And it was, an evil house attracts evil men. And this idea of burning down the house is what's going to end this. And again, I thought it was an interesting take because typically, you have a haunted house, the haunted house gets destroyed. You have a home in which, I don't know, a bunch of creepy neighbors move into, and Tom Hanks and all the rest of the neighbors decide, we're going to set it on fire. Well, they don't really decide. They just end up setting it on fire in order to, I don't know, get rid of them. I mean, because once the house is gone, they have nowhere that they're going to be able to stay. Did the burning of the house, I guess this is a long way of getting to the question, did the burning of the house work for either of you? As story-wise or even just in general?
It's at a point where it's so tropey in horror that I kind of get annoyed now when they burn down the house. But I like in this how it takes the town because of it. But overall, I thought it worked. I think that he truly believes in the evil of the house, right? So I feel like that's the only way to get there. You either have to burn it down or blow it up or something. So in this situation, it definitely works for me.
Yeah, I want to say it worked for me too for wrapping up the movie. It was a good ending. Except James and I were talking about the glowing holy water there at the end.
Right.
And also Susan almost having this like weird Bride of Frankenstein throwback moment, lying in all of her glory. Where was she anyway? I kind of missed that part, I think. She was in some sort of...
I was confused.
I was confused too. Where was that? Where did that take place where she was lying in some like bed with a candle?
Before she gets staked?
Yeah.
Well, it's supposed to be in Mexico.
But like what is the building?
Is
it part of the mission, or is it like... I didn't comprehend where they were exactly.
It looked as though it was because of the excavation and everything that they were doing at the beginning to try and find her. Which, rewatching this, having not watched it in forever, the beginning of the film was like, okay, I had completely forgotten about it till you get to the end. I'm like, oh, that's right. This is 2 years before the beginning of the movie. But no, it seems almost like the search for Pazuzu in The Exorcist. Like, we're going through this stuff to try and find something, and then that the holy water glows to let them know that vampires near. Very, very Tolkien of them to
yes.
That.
And it was blue too. It's the orc
Sadie,
sword.
Do you remember how Susan dies in the book versus this? Because I know it's different, but I don't know what's different about it. Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
Sure.
I wanted to like go back and look, and I kept forgetting. But no, I don't remember how she dies, unfortunately.
Oh, that's cool.
Or if
one of my
dies.
friends. Yeah, one of my friends just mentioned that this one, 2004, and the book all treat Susan differently at the end. Like they each do their own thing. And so I was just curious if you knew. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, I did
if any of you know, comment and tell me.
I love how, though, Susan is a really brave woman, and she is in the book too, and she isn't in the movie. So I did like that. She is her own person, and she decides her own things. She definitely does that in the book, where it's like, wait, where did she go? Oh, she went to Marston House. What? Like, why would you just by yourself, wander through the halls of this place where there's a possible vampire? Just really like out of the box thinking for me. I would just never. I would be like, okay, well, you guys go have fun. Hope you kill and stake the vampire. Let me know how it goes. I'll wait here for when you get back.
And I love her scene with Mark when they're in the house. I thought those scenes were so well done, and just I was really, really into the movie at that point. I was like,
me too.
This is great. Like I love those scenes. I wish that was even just a little bit longer. Even just Mark closing that door when the other vampires are coming for him, and then he's trying to keep it shut. Like all of that was so well done. And then I loved that we don't exactly know what happens to her. Like a lot of films would spell this out for us, and I thought it was kind of great that it just kind of drops off until it doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
I also loved when the vampires were crawling towards Mark and he doesn't really see them and they're kind of in the background.
Yes.
And I recently saw somebody put together like a whole montage of horror movies where something is happening in the background that the audience gets to see, that the characters don't necessarily, they're not aware of or get to see. And we can add this miniseries to that list, because that was terrifying, because we as the audience can see them creeping up on him with their glowing eyes. That was great. I thought that was a great moment.
And that is the one reason that I don't care for the beginning of this, because I think that if you held on to that beginning scene, then they make it out of this, because that's 2 years later, right?
Right.
And I thought that takes a little bit of the tension out here. Like if you had no idea and you're watching going, oh shit, is Mark gonna turn here? Like, that would be way better for me. But what are you gonna do?
Well, just rewrite the movie, James. That's what you're going to do.
Absolutely not right now. There's a strike going on. Oh, anyway.
Oh.
All right. So I guess that brings us to movie recommendations, where I usually do a double feature and Don gives us 249 movies. And the guest normally gives us movies. But today I want to switch it up a little bit. Sadie, books are your love. And I want to know, if people love Salem's Lot, what else should they read?
Well, I mean, we could go the easy route and talk about vampire novels, which I think we should do a few vampire novels. I recently read, well, first I want to recommend Andy Davidson has one called In the Valley of the Sun. It's kind of underrated, I think. It's one of the best books I've ever read. And
wow.
Truly. And if you love vampires and you don't love kind of the more, it's hard to say. I don't want to say the word campy, so I'm not going to say that word. But vampires do sometimes have that over the top glitz and glamour of like Anne Rice style vampires.
Right.
There's that kind of sexy vampire lore where the vampires are really hot and strutting around and rich and famous and have this a extravagant lifestyle. There's that. This is more of the kind of vampire where you don't know. They're just intermixed with regular people, and they're living their lives trying maybe not to be vampires. And so check out In the Valley of the Sun. Also, I just read Christopher Buehlman's The Suicide Motor Club, which, if you like scary vampires, like I think Salem's Lot is scary, these are the scariest vampires ever. They are a band of vampires who they can charm their victims into doing their will, and they try to hide away from society and kill their victims by encouraging their victims to get into car accidents. And then the vampires are the first on the scene. So
Oh, wow.
they get to, have a bounty of blood at the accident scene. And then by the time, authorities arrive or an ambulance or whatever, the vampires have already had their fill. And then they kind of cross the wrong person. And she, just in her grief and her sorrow, becomes a nun and then decides to go back and get revenge on these vampires. So is it a nun who is seeking revenge on a team of vampires? Yes, it's that. It's
awesome.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
That's very original. I like that.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. So those are my two recommendations: In the Valley of the Sun and The Suicide Motor Club by Christopher Buehlman, if you want vampires. But I also think, like, if you just like small town horror and that's kind of your thing, this miniseries had total Storm of the Century vibes to me. I think that you should pick up the screenplay Storm of the Century by Stephen King, which is another small town being ravaged by an evil entity. And I'm not going to give too much away, actually. I was going to say something and I decided not to. And also Needful Things, right, James?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think
love Needful Things so much.
Me too. It's the best small town horror next to Salem's Lot.
There you go. All right, one more curveball question for you before Don and I get into movie recs. Is Salem's Lot your favorite Stephen King book? Do you have a favorite Stephen King book? And if it's not, where does it still rank?
Ooh. I did recently do a top 10 Stephen King recommendation, and it changes all the time. Salem's Lot's my first. I wouldn't say it's my top favorite, but it's in my top 10 favorite. I love it because it's my first, and I think it's really good. But I would be hard-pressed to choose between that and The Shining. I love The Shining so much. Nice. I also really do love Dr. Sleep. It took me a minute, but after I saw Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep movie, I love it even more. Do you love that movie? I freaking love that movie.
Oh, I do. I love it very, very much. I didn't expect to at all. I thought I would absolutely not hate it, but I just thought it would bother me. And instead, I was so in love with it. And I will just freely admit that I am madly in love with Rose, and she can kill me any day she wants.
I am also in love with her. The Rose the Hat character was so good in that movie. Oh my God. Speaking of vampires, they were kind of vampiric also.
Yeah, definitely.
So other top 10 favorite Stephen King, I would go with 11/22/63.
Yes.
Duma Key is a really underrated Stephen King book, also revival. Those are two favorites. My most read Stephen King book is The Eyes of the Dragon, believe it or not. When I was a kid, I loved fantasy. And so I was kind of dabbling between two worlds in the horror and fantasy. Mm-hmm. And Stephen King brought those two together for me. Plus, I just thought it was really endearing that he wrote it for his daughter. And yeah, I've read it the most times. It's so good. And I've also read The Gunslinger probably the most times too. Misery is another top favorite, but I think my all-time favorite is It. And I've read It a significant number of times. It's also a small town, also a band of like cool kids who fight evil. Yeah, it's just probably my favorite. And also Pennywise's Bay.
Oh yeah, he's definitely.
I love
All right. So movie recs for my double feature. I was gonna throw out Lost Boys just because Sadie covered it, and
Hell
I do
yeah.
think that I do think the two would be cool together. But I love ruining stuff that's on Don's list. So instead, I'm gonna go with Fright Night.
You son of a bitch.
Ooh.
I think
Son of a
Fright Night
bitch.
and Salem's Lot would be an amazing double feature.
Because I had Lost Boys and Fright Night on my list, so now we're down to 227.
I will throw out my favorite Stephen King movies are oddly not the straight horror stuff. I believe that Shawshank is the greatest movie ever made, and Stand By Me is one of the most important films of my life.
Yes, mine
so
too,
there you go.
James.
All right,
Mine
Don,
too.
you're down to 247 choices.
All
now.
right,
Go for it.
All right. So first and foremost, I'm going to go with House. Love that movie.
Beautiful.
Loved it as a kid. Yeah, I think it would be a great pairing with this one. Cat's Eye, the same thing. The Exorcist, I mentioned a couple of times. Silence of the Lambs. Goosebumps. Both Jack. Well, I mean, I guess it's just the Jack Black movies. I jokingly wrote down Peter Pan, but
With the window.
yeah.
I love that.
Somebody please make me a video of Wendy going to the window, but it's the Glick Kid instead. I want to see that so bad. Maybe I need a
Please.
t-shirt of that.
Yes.
I don't know. I need something.
You know it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Oh my god.
Please
I love
do.
that.
I would wear that to every con. Please make that
Oh my
happen.
god.
All right. So Village of the Damned, Children of the Corn.
Ooh, yeah.
A movie that one day somebody will request, which is Population 436. In the Mouth of Madness, and last but not least, James would never pick this one. Quantum Leap, the episode Boogeyman.
Wow.
I don't think I've seen that.
Yes, it's the original series, but it's. I'm just gonna. There's even a Stephen King reference in it, so I would say check that one out if you have not. It's on Peacock. Just look for the episode Boogeyman. I think it's supposed to be like October 31st, 1964 or something like that.
Nice.
But it's so well done. There's so much horror lore that's thrown into it. So many connections that are made for horror and sci-fi fans. And the story itself is well done. And there's a really cool twist.
Very cool.
Yeah, sold.
All right. So Sadie, that brings it back to you. You want to tell people where they can follow you online, join Nightworms, pick up your new book, and anything else you want to tell them?
Yeah, definitely pre-order 101 horror books to read before you're murdered. Basically anywhere books are sold. That would be really cool. I don't think people talk about how pre-orders are so helpful to fledgling books. I mean, especially debuts. I think it's really important. So that would be really awesome if people would pre-order that book. But if you don't want to, I will be signing signed copies. So stay tuned for that. I'll be putting that out on social media. And Nightworms just had a subscription window and we closed it. We sold out really quickly. We were doing a exclusive special package, a partnership with Pandy Press. So that sold out quickly, but our next available opportunity will be at the end of this month. So yeah, just always watch our Instagram or Twitter for when we're going to be doing subscription runs. Or you can also sign up for our newsletter, which is on our website. Yeah, that's it for me, promo wise.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing this. I had a great time, and I definitely don't think I would have rewatched this. Like, it wasn't like I don't want to. It just wasn't on my list, and I'm so glad I did. It hit very differently as an angry old man, but it wasn't really just about stop signs and doors. It just hit me very differently than it did as a teen, and I really enjoyed watching it. So, thank you.
It was really fun.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show.
Absolutely. All right. I guess that wraps it up for another week. As always, I am James Sabata.
And I'll be descending through your window.
Excellent. And we will see you here at the Necronomicon.com forever, because we will be together forever.